So as I said, we did some stats, what's called modelling, where if you think of it as putting a whole lot of jelly beans in a jar and then tipping them out on the table. And what you would like to see, if the tools are working really well, that you've got your data from, is you'd like to see jelly beans, the colours sort of cluster together. Okay? If we have no relationship, then basically the jelly beans are just going to fall where they go and it's random and we're not going to get a lot of information from them. So think about that when I go through here. It's about what clusters are we looking at, what relationships do we have between what we're doing on the ground and what theory and information that Therese and Jacqueline have put forward as what is actually happening with HPS and what is the impact it's having. So our evidence, our indicators, our jelly beans, we looked at the school survey and the outcomes. And in particular, we were interested in looking at the quality and performance of the facilitator, because our theoretical view of what was happening is that facilitators have a really important role to play in making those connections with school leaders and schools and other areas in the health sector. We looked at performance on the HPS wellbeing, health and wellbeing rubric, and you've actually got that in your kitties there. And that's actually, it came through as being a very, very good tool. So a really good tool to use with schools, but a really good tool with your facilitators to use as far as assessing where you're at. Now I believe, Therese, that this was worked on, this tool, that's it, it's the big A3 page there, with Aero as well. So it's a very, very rigorous tool. So from that tool, we looked at the quality and performance of HPS schools. We looked at whānau engagement with schools, because there's indicators there that help you assess how well you're going, how well you're engaging whānau. And we looked at the level of inquiry, because as you see across the top of each of those pages, you've got 1 to 4, 0 to 4, saying that some schools are just still emerging as an HPS school, and some schools that inquiry levels 3 and 4 are doing really, really well. And that's when the facilitators can step back, and instead of the hand-holding relationship, they can step back because the schools are really have got the policies and strategies embedded as part of the everyday process, that it becomes a norm within the school. And the Aero cycle. So obviously schools get visits based on how well they're doing as a school. And schools that are struggling might get 6 months yearly visits, and schools that are doing well and functioning well and have processes in place and are getting good student achievement data will be on a longer period before they get a visit again, so more like 3 years, 4 years. Now what I wanted to do is not pick against the schools that were doing well and the schools that weren't. We wanted the best case scenario of how schools are going. So I made the analogy down in Wellington, is that we wanted to test the Ferrari on the track, okay? So we said, what are the best case scenarios of schools performing using the HPS approach? We were interested in these student impacts or student outcomes. So we had attendance, stand-downs and suspensions, and transients. So we had data, and the data was all came from the Ministry of Education on all these rates. And of course we had the national standards data on English, maths and writing. Now, what we did when we were looking at this information, as I say, it's a bit like the jar of jelly beans. We put it all in together and we see what clusters, what relationships are. So we know there's a relationship between height and weight. And what SEM does, which is statistical structural equation modelling, you don't have to remember that, hopefully that went in one ear and out the other. But what it does is it looks for relationships so that we can predict outcomes. So if you have a chart of height and weight, there's usually a relationship between your height and how much you weigh. And because we can chart that and we know what that relationship is, it means we can not know someone's height, but know their weight and get a good estimate of whether they're 6'4". So it's the same thing here. Our data will tell us what is the relationship between these variables, and then we can try predicting if those variables didn't exist, what would be the relationship if they weren't there. Now, the findings were I think were quite interesting and quite powerful. Of the gains that the schools, and these are the best case schools, okay, of the gains from the best case schools, 60% of those gains were attributable to their involvement in the HPS approach. So when you think about schools that are doing very, very well, and all those indicators we spoke about before, HPS was contributing to over half of the natural gains that they have in attendance rates, which sort of makes sense. If kids are involved, whānau's involved, you've got kids enjoying school, doing well at school, they're probably going to attend more often. Stand-downs and suspensions, of the stand-down and suspensions that had occurred in these schools, nearly 50% were attributable to how well those schools were doing with their health promoting schools approach. Transients, we had too much missing data, unfortunately, so we weren't able to find any results from there. But I think that's really an interesting result down the bottom, that of the gains that these schools had made in national standards reading data, 29% were attributable to how well and how advanced they were in their HPS approach. So nearly a third. Now, we only found this in reading. There wasn't that relationship between HPS and maths or HPS and writing. So that's an interesting result. Sorry, HPS and maths and writing. Now this is a horrible little diagram here. You've got something similar in the report that you've got at your desks there. But if you think of these 0.52 and 0.81 and 0.72, relationships from a statistical point of view are based on 0, meaning there's no relationship, and 1, meaning a perfect relationship, which we know in everyday lives there's no such thing. Even height and weight, we know there are people that can be 5'2" and still weigh 100 kilograms. Okay, so it's not a perfect linear relationship. So if you think of it like that, the higher these numbers are, the higher these values are, the stronger the relationship was between these areas and improvement here in attendance. So when you look at that rubric, all those areas within that rubric were analysed. We looked at the school survey data, particularly looking at facilitator effectiveness, and obviously the Aero cycle at the end there. Again, they were our 3 measures. Now within those measures, we've got a whole lot of areas that we look at and try and get data back on. And these were the ones that clustered together. So for Aero cycle, there were schools that were on the 3 to 4 visit review from Aero. They were the well-performing schools. Within the rubric, again your A3 there, leadership for equity and excellence came through really strongly. So schools that had a strong focus on that, and also that had a strong focus on what Therese was talking about, which are those educationally powerful relationships. So what I like about using a lot of big data to do this is it's very objective. You throw it in and results come out. And then Therese was talking about case studies and other data that they collected, and then you had the objective collection of data from Jacqueline's parent survey, and it's a great way of triangulating what's coming through here. And a powerful, as you can see, 0.81, a powerful relationship between educationally powerful relationships, basically bringing in the school leadership, teachers, students and parents and whānau, was the strongest predictor or strongest driver towards increases in attendance. You had frequent contact and supporting school leaders, so that's what you facilitators do. And you can see there that was 0.69. So in the world of relationships, again 0 to 1, anything sort of 0.6, 0.7 onwards is saying that is a strong relationship. To a lesser degree, 0.52 there, are the Aero cycles. So what's interesting about that, it says Aero cycle and a successful HPS school that's having that sort of impact on attendance is there as a contributing to that relationship, but it's certainly not the dominant one. Which gives you the impression then, and we did test this, is that the schools that aren't as well placed on the Aero cycle, that are 1 and 2 years, can still have a similar effect on attendance. Not quite as powerful as what these values are saying, but similar. Did the exact same thing on stand downs and suspensions. You can see the outcome variables change there. Exact same outcome for educationally powerful relationships on stand downs and suspensions. A lesser value again for Aero cycle, so it has an impact but it's not strong driver. And frequent contact and supporting school leaders again came through as the facilitated driver for improvements in stand downs and suspensions. And one more, we were looking at the academic achievement, and as I said, we didn't see it in reading and maths, writing and maths, but we did see it in reading. So what was driving here is, again, we're now 0.91, so the relationship is climbing up for whānau involvement and having that relationship with schools, with students, with staff. So you can see what a powerful driver that is of all the student outcomes that we looked at, and that just continued all the way through with the modelling that we did. Schools here, the Aero cycle did kick in, which probably makes sense when we're looking at achievement data. Leadership for equity and excellence kicked in. Again, we're looking for 0.7 and up. That's a really good result. And to a lesser degree, the facilitator impact here. So we saw that facilitator impact was very strong with the outcomes looking at stand downs, suspensions, and attendance, but a lesser degree when we're looking at the academic outcome. Now again, this was one lot of data set, and these results were really powerful around the 2015 and 2016 data that we saw these impacts. But I'm hoping that a result like that, when we're looking at academic achievement, might be cause for a really good conversation. And I think what we found here, although it's to a lesser degree, it's certainly stronger in all these other variables. So it's saying here that if you're a well-placed school on your Aero cycle, you've formed really good relationships with parents and whānau, you've got to focus on equity and excellence within your school, that they are really going to drive your academic achievement in reading. Now, the powerful thing about these results that have come through is that the data that was collected is of high quality, and that meant that we could look at thousands and thousands of results. That means that it's statistically strong. And also this sort of research, because we had lots of data and we had really good tools like that rubric that you've got there, it's sort of the first time in the world that health promoting schools can get analysed in this way. So we've got the benefit of the data here, again, with many of these variables getting triangulated given other data sets and other methods of collecting data. And think about it too when you have your case studies and you have your examples of schools. Think about what's come through here at a big data level, at a parent survey level, and with some of the examples that Therese and Annie were talking about earlier. So they were the findings. I know some of you might have been here when I was presenting, I think in the same room, looking at what we were going to do as far as modelling all the variables that are part of the HPS approach. Now, other variables came through, but these were the top ones. These were showing the strongest relationship against those targeted school outcomes. What we also were interested in was looking at the schools that weren't part of the HPS approach, but had some sort of health promotion occurring in their school. And they didn't get this. There weren't strong relationships, because when you think about it, they're independent initiatives. And a lot of those, I won't say all because it's possibly a gross generalisation, but I don't know how many of the different things that go into schools, the different health promotion initiatives that go into schools, we don't know, they may know, but we don't know the sort of impact they have on these targeted student outcomes. But when they were compared with schools doing the health promoting approach as opposed to health promotion, There was no comparison as far as impact. In fact, none of the impact was statistically significant. When you looked at mean differences in performance between 3 samples, the schools that aren't doing health promotion or the HPS approach, and achievement, schools that were doing the HPS approach had significantly higher mean performance scores. And that's why we can attribute that health promotion approach is having an impact there in those gains that are made. Because when we looked at schools that weren't doing anything and schools that only were having a health promotion initiative in their schools, there weren't the same relationships. So for me as an evaluator, I look at data like this and I see that the health promoting schools approach is knitting together the crucial parts of school health initiatives, bringing whānau involved, having a high expectation of equity and excellence in your school, and bringing students in to help with the decision making. Obviously, one other powerful effect was the facilitators coming in. So again, they're the glue. They're the glue making this happen, and it's powerful.